You're stumbling forward in darkness, your hands outstretched, searching for the man in front of you. You can hear him breathing ragged, exhausted, but you cannot see him. You cannot see anything. Where your eyes once were, there is only pain, crusted blood, and the memory of light. Around you, thousands of voices moan in confusion and agony. You are not alone in this darkness. You are part of a procession and army of the damned, shuffling homeward to show your king what the world looks like when an empire decides that death is too merciful a punishment. Before we descend further into this nightmare, I want to know where in the world are you watching from right now? It's still incredible to me that a story this dark, this ancient, can reach someone on the other side of the planet centuries later. Drop your location in the comments. This happened in the summer of 1014 in the mountains between what we now call Greece and Bulgaria. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome itself. Glittering Constantinople at its heart, had been at war with the Bulgarian Empire for decades. But this wasn't just war. This was something deeper. This was a blood feud between two men who hated each other with a purity that transcended politics, transcended strategy, transcended even the survival of their kingdoms. One was Emperor Basil II, a man so methodical in his cruelty that history would remember him by a single chilling epithet: Basil the Bulgar Slayer. The other was Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria, a warrior king who had spent his entire life building an empire that Basil considered an insult to God's natural order. And on a battlefield in the Clyden Pass, in the heat of July 1014, Basil won. He captured 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers. He had them at his mercy. He could have ransomed them, executed them, enslaved them, all acceptable within the brutal mathematics of medieval warfare. Instead, he did something that no military commander had ever done on such a scale. He ordered them blinded, not killed. Blinded 99 men out of every 100 had both eyes destroyed. The 100th man was left with one eye, just enough vision to lead his sightless brothers home. Just enough to witness the horror he was guiding back to his king. This is the story of what happens when revenge becomes art, when punishment becomes theater. When two rulers hate each other so completely that 15,000 human lives become nothing more than a message written in mutilated flesh. To understand how we arrived at this moment of systematic horror, you need to go back 28 years earlier, to another mountain pass, to another battle that would plant the seeds of this vengeance. It's the summer of 986. Emperor Basil II is still young, late 20s, confident, perhaps too confident. He's recently crushed some internal rebellions. He's proven himself capable. And now he's decided it's time to solve the Bulgarian problem permanently. He assembles a massive force, perhaps 30,000 men. Though medieval numbers are always suspect, marches deep into Bulgarian territory. His target is the fortress of Serdica, modern-day Sofia. It's a strategic stronghold, and taking it would crack open the heart of the Bulgarian state. But Tsar Samuel has been watching. He's fought the Byzantines before. He knows he can't match their numbers, their equipment, their wealth. So he doesn't try. After some inconclusive fighting, Basil decides to withdraw for the winter. It's August, which seems reasonable. Regroup, resupply, return in the spring. But to get back to Byzantine territory, Basil's army must pass through a narrow gorge in the Sredna Gora Mountains, a place known as the Gates of Trajan. Samuel saw this moment coming like a chess master sees checkmate 3 moves ahead. He positioned his forces in the heights, overlooking that narrow valley, and let the entire Byzantine army, 30,000 professional soldiers with all their armor and arrogance, march right into the trap. Then, when they were strung out in the confined space, unable to form proper battle lines, exhausted from the march, Samuel attacked. The Bulgarians poured down from the mountains like a landslide of steel and fury. The Byzantine column shattered. Soldiers trampled each other, trying to escape. The emperor's bodyguard fought desperately to protect him, but the chaos was absolute. According to the chroniclers, Basil himself barely escaped with his life. He abandoned his army, mounted a fast horse, and fled back to Constantinople, leaving thousands of his men to die in that valley. The Bulgarians captured the imperial treasury traveling with the army. They captured weapons, armor, supplies. But more importantly, they captured something intangible and infinitely more dangerous: Basil's dignity. For a Byzantine emperor, a man who believed he was God's chosen instrument on earth, the living heir to Rome itself, this wasn't just a military defeat. This was a cosmic humiliation. This was the natural order of the universe being violated. And Basil, as the chronicler John Skylitzes would later write, never forgave an injury. That phrase, never forgave an injury. It sounds almost quaint when you read it in translation. But watch what it means in practice. Watch what unforgiveness looks like when it has an empire's resources behind it. Basil didn't rush back for revenge. That's what makes him terrifying. Instead, he spent years turning inward, crushing internal threats, consolidating power, learning patience. He became colder, more methodical. The somewhat impetuous young emperor was burned away in the crucible of humiliation, leaving behind something harder, something that could wait decades if necessary. And starting in the late 980s, Basil began his life's work, the systematic destruction of Bulgaria. Not through one glorious battle, but through a strategy of relentless, grinding attrition. Every single year, he would campaign in Bulgarian territory. He didn't seek out Samuel's main army for a decisive engagement. Instead, he went after infrastructure. He burned crops. He destroyed farmlands. He captured and demolished fortresses one by one. Then he'd march back to Byzantine territory. Next summer, repeat. Imagine living in Bulgaria during these years. Every summer, you'd hear the news: the Byzantine army is coming. You'd abandon your fields, hide what little you could, hope your local fortress might hold. Even if your particular village was spared, you'd know someone else's crops were burning, which meant less food for everyone next winter. Year after year after year. The psychological weight of the knowledge that this would never stop, that Basil would keep coming until nothing remained, was suffocating. Samuel fought back brilliantly. He was a master of defensive warfare, and he made Basil pay in blood for every advance. In 998, he even counterattacked, invading Byzantine territory and reaching the walls of Thessaloniki. But the mathematics were inexorable. The Byzantine Empire had more resources, more men, more gold. They could absorb losses and keep coming. Bulgaria couldn't. By the early 1010s, the pattern was undeniable. Fortresses that had held for decades were falling. Bulgarian nobles, reading the future in the ash of their burned fields, began defecting to the Byzantine side. The empire Samuel had spent his life building was being strangled by inches. And Samuel, now in his 60s, ancient by medieval standards, must have felt time running out. He'd spent everything defending this kingdom. He couldn't outlast Basil. He couldn't win a war of attrition. But maybe, just maybe, he could win one decisive battle that would make the Byzantines reconsider. One victory that would buy his people a few more years, a chance to negotiate something. He found what he thought was the perfect place to make that stand: the Clyden Pass, a narrow gorge between steep mountains. In July 1014, when scouts reported that Basil's army was approaching, Samuel committed everything he had left. He ordered the construction of a massive fortification across the valley. Walls of timber and earth that completely blocked the pass. Behind this barrier, he positioned perhaps 12,000 to 15,000 men, the best troops Bulgaria still possessed. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Basil couldn't go around the mountains, were too rugged, so he'd have to come through, and when he did, the narrow confines would negate his numerical advantage. The Bulgarians would slaughter them from behind the wall, just as they'd done at the gates of Trajan 28 years earlier. When Basil arrived and saw the fortification, he must have felt that flash of recognition, the same type of trap, the same terrain advantage. But he wasn't the same man anymore. He was 56 years old. He'd spent nearly 3 decades waging this war, and he'd learned something crucial. Patience is just another weapon. He ordered his troops to attack the wall anyway. For days, sources say, anywhere from 3 to 7, the Byzantines launched frontal assaults. And for days, they were thrown back with heavy casualties. The Bulgarians fought with desperate fury, raining arrows and javelins and stones down on anyone who approached. The Byzantine dead piled up at the base of the fortification. Some of Basil's generals urged retreat. Find another route. Come back next year. But Basil was talking quietly with one of his best commanders, a general named Nikephoros Xiphias. And Xiphias had a crazy idea. What if we don't go through the pass at all? What if we go over the mountain? The Balkans mountain range wasn't gentle hills. It was trackless wilderness, steep and unforgiving. Moving an armed force through it would be exhausting, dangerous, potentially suicidal if Samuel discovered what they were doing. But if it worked, Basil gave permission. Xiphias took several thousand men and began a grueling multi-day trek through terrain with no proper paths, while the main Byzantine army continued attacking the wall to keep the Bulgarians focused forward. Xiphias and his soldiers were climbing through forests and across ridges, moving with full equipment, trying to stay silent, knowing that one Bulgarian scout spotting them could mean death. Then, on the morning of July 29, 1014, as the Bulgarians stood at their positions, exhausted, but triumphant because they'd held the pass for days, they heard something that must have frozen their blood. Byzantine war cries from behind their lines, from the direction of their own camp. Xiphias had made it. His force emerged from the mountains directly behind the Bulgarian army. The psychological shock was absolute. Imagine being a Bulgarian soldier at that wall. You've been fighting for days. You're winning. Your defensive position is impregnable. And then suddenly there are enemy soldiers coming from the direction that's supposed to be safe, from behind, from the place where your food and supplies and hopes were stored. The defense collapsed almost immediately. Men abandoned their positions and tried to flee. But the fortification they'd so carefully built to keep the Byzantines out now trapped them in. They were caught between Xiphias behind and Basil's main force in front. The defensive position became a slaughterhouse. Tsar Samuel barely escaped. His son Gabriel fought off Byzantine soldiers long enough to get him onto a horse. But behind them, the Bulgarian army was being destroyed. The battle turned into a rout, and the rout into a massacre. And when the killing finally stopped and the Byzantine soldiers were rounding up prisoners, they found themselves with approximately 15,000 captured Bulgarian soldiers, disarmed, stripped of armor, herded together under guard. The battle was over. Bulgaria had lost. But for these prisoners, the horror was just beginning. Because Emperor Basil II, standing on that battlefield, was thinking about the gates of Trajan. He was thinking about 28 years of humiliation, and he was about to turn 15,000 human beings into a message. The order he gave must have seemed incomprehensible at first. The prisoners were divided into groups of 100. Then Byzantine soldiers began the systematic blinding of 99 men in each group. Let's be precise about what this means, because the reality matters. This wasn't surgical. This was medieval battlefield punishment. The method likely involved heated iron rods or sharp blades driven directly into the eyes. Some sources suggest daggers piercing the eyeballs. Others mention cauterization to prevent bleeding out. Whatever the specific technique, it was agonizing beyond description, and it was permanent. These men would never see light again. They would never see their families, their homes, their own hands. They would be dependent on others for basic survival, unable to work most jobs, unable to fight, marked forever. But here's the diabolical genius of what Basil ordered. The 100th man in each group wasn't completely blinded. He was left with one eye, one single eye. Why? Because someone needed to lead the blind men home. This wasn't mercy. This was the opposite of mercy. Basil was ensuring that his message would be delivered in the most visceral, horrifying way possible. These one-eyed men were given a new purpose: guide your sightless brothers back to Tsar Samuel. Make him see what resistance costs. Modern historians debate the exact numbers. 15,000 is suspiciously round, and the ratio of 99-1 is almost too symbolically perfect. But while the precise figures might be inflated, the core event is undisputed. A mass blinding occurred on a scale unprecedented in warfare. Multiple independent sources confirm it. The physical evidence, the sudden collapse of Bulgarian resistance afterward, Samuel's death shortly after confirms it. Think about the logistics for a moment. This wasn't done in the heat of battle. This took days. There had to be organization, orders, a systematic process. Prisoners had to be processed group by group. And through all of it, the screaming, the begging, the realization among the prisoners at the back of the line as they watched what was being done to the men at the front, knowing their turn was coming. Byzantine soldiers carried out their emperor's command. When it was finished, when the last eye had been destroyed, Basil gave these men one final order: go home, walk back to your king. Show him what the Byzantine Empire does to those who resist. And so began one of the most horrifying processions in human history. Thousands of men stumbling in absolute darkness. Their faces were masks of dried blood and fluid from their ruined eyes. Many were suffering from infection. This was medieval warfare. Nothing was sterile, and eye injuries were particularly prone to going septic. Some were certainly dying from their wounds as they walked. The pain must have been constant, all-consuming, without relief. And each group of 99 blind men was led by a single half-blind man who could see just enough to witness the full scope of the nightmare he was guiding homeward. The march probably took weeks. The distance was substantial, and these men weren't moving quickly. They had to beg for food along the way. Local villagers must have stared in horror at this endless column of mutilated soldiers. The news spread ahead of them like a plague warning. The Bulgarian army is coming back, but you won't believe what was done to them. When this procession finally reached Tsar Samuel's camp in late summer of 1014, the old king came out to greet his returning soldiers. He was expecting news from the battle. What he saw instead destroyed him. All the sources agree on his reaction. John Skylitzes writes that Samuel fainted on the spot when he saw the thousands of blinded men stumbling toward him. Imagine that moment with the weight it deserves. You're an elderly man who spent your entire life, every decision, every sacrifice, building and defending an empire. And now you see this. Thousands of your soldiers reduced to living ghosts, walking monuments to your failure. The chroniclers say Samuel never recovered from the shock. He died 2 days later, on October 6, 1014. Whether it was a stroke, a heart attack, or simply the crushing weight of grief and despair, the result was the same. Basil's psychological weapon had struck with more force than any sword. He hadn't just destroyed an army. His calculated cruelty had literally killed an enemy king, and it earned him the title by which history would remember him: Basil Bulgaroctus, Basil the Bulgar Slayer. The death of Samuel shattered Bulgaria's will to resist. Without a king or an army, and with terror radiating through every village, resistance collapsed. By 1018, Bulgaria was fully absorbed into the Byzantine Empire. The kingdom that had once humiliated Basil II vanished from the map. Basil lived 7 more years, dying in 1025 at 67. He never married, never had heirs, and seemed to desire nothing except the expansion and security of his empire. At his death, Byzantium stood at its greatest strength in centuries, stretching from southern Italy to the borders of Persia. But the 15,000 blinded soldiers lived on. Those who survived the march and infection became beggars, dependents, and warnings whispered to children. Some died quickly. Others lived for years, carrying the memory of light fading season by season. The blinding at Clyden remains one of history's most chilling acts of psychological warfare. Basil understood that terror could achieve what armies could not: 15,000 ruined men walking home would break a nation more completely than 15,000 corpses. He turned human beings into a message. Resistance would be punished with fates worse than death. Was Basil a monster or a brilliant strategist? The disturbing answer may be that he was both. After Bulgaria's absorption, Basil ordered small pensions for the blinded men not from remorse, but because they were now imperial subjects. The same hand that destroyed their sight ensured their survival. That paradox defines the story. To Basil, cruelty was justice, mercy was order. To the men living in darkness, the distinction meant nothing. They existed between life and death, warriors turned into warnings. The Clyden Pass still stands, quiet and unmarked. But in history's chronicles, those men are still walking home, carrying a message meant for others and remembered for 1,000 years. Not death, but something worse.